Nicholas de Villiers is a professor of English and film at the University of North Florida, and he was also, during 2023 and 24, Fulbright U.S. Senior Scholar in Taiwan at National Central University at the Center for the Study of Sexualities. He's author of a number of books: Opacity in the Closet, Queer Tactics in Foucault, Barthes, and Warhol, 2012, Sexography, Sex Work, and Documentary, 2017, and most recently, and this will be the topic primarily of today's talk, Cruisy, Sleepy, Melancholy, Sexual Disorientation in the Films of Tsai Ming-liang, 2022, all published by University of Minnesota Press, where I understand you have fond memories of from being a TA. So we were talking about that just a few minutes ago. After the talk, we will have, as usual, our Q&A. Today will be a little bit different. My colleague, Unsan Kim, who is assistant professor in the Department of Asian Languages and Literature, and also an esteemed film scholar of Taiwan, will be in charge of the Q&A. So Unsan will moderate. Why don't you just say hello to everybody, Unsan. So Professor Kim will be the moderator, and then I will hand over those duties to him after Professor de Villiers is done talking. I think that should be it. For those of you who are joining us online, as usual, please leave us your questions and comments in the comment section of YouTube, and then I'll leave my laptop up here for you, Unsan, so that you can see the comments as they come in on the YouTube channel. And so comments that come in online, just read them out loud so that everybody knows what's being asked. Same thing for questions from the audience. If you could just repeat the question because you have the microphone once we go into the Q&A. Okay, thanks, Unsan. All right, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Professor de Villiers. Thank you very much.
Are you going to make any opening remarks? Or? Okay, thank you very much. Many thanks to Professor James Lin and Professor Unsan Kim for this invitation to talk about my book, Cruisy, Sleepy, Melancholy, Sexual Disorientation in the Films of Tsai Ming-liang here at the University of Washington Taiwan Studies Program, with thanks to the Zhang Jingguo Foundation. As I expressed to Professor Kim when he contacted me, I'm so grateful to be invited for an in-person book talk because this book came out during the pandemic and all of my book talks were on Zoom. I'm very grateful for those who are joining online, but there's really something to be said for being invited in person for a campus book talk. So I'm incredibly grateful, and to visit Seattle and your beautiful campus. I also want to acknowledge the support for the research that I'll be discussing today from the Fulbright Taiwan and from the Taiwan Ministry of Science and Technology, now NSTC, for 2 visiting scholar appointments at National Central University, hosted by their Center for the Study of Sexualities, in 2017 researching this book on Tsai, and 2023 researching his post-retirement career, including Days and an exhibition at the Museum of the National Taipei University of Education that I'll discuss at the end of this talk. I already miss Taiwan a lot, so it's really nice to have a chance to reflect on and share these experiences with you today. So many of the most significant publications on Taiwan-based filmmaker Tsai Ming-liang focus on questions of time, temporality and duration, but also nostalgia and melancholy, or what Song Hui Lim has named a cinema of slowness. In my recently published book, Cruisy, Sleepy, Melancholy, Sexual Disorientation in the Films of Tsai Ming-liang, I contend that we also need a queer theory of space and spatial practices to understand Tsai's cinematic exploration of feeling melancholy, cruisy, and sleepy, affects with temporal and spatial implications. This presentation builds on those arguments to address Tsai Ming-liang's post-retirement queer Teddy Award-winning film, digital film Days. Anyone here seen Days? Came out 2022. I first saw it online, and then I'll talk about seeing it in Taiwan. It was set in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Thailand, and also a short post-retirement film called The Night, and the Chinese title translates as The Beautiful Night is Slipping Away, that was set in Hong Kong. But first I want to show you Tsai's short film, It's a Dream, which was set in Tsai's birthplace of Malaysia. And I might turn off the lights. So this is part of a Cannes Film Festival 60th anniversary compilation called Chacun son cinéma, où ce petit coup au cœur quand la lumière s'éteint et que le film commence. Something like a little thrill when the lights dim and the film starts. So it's 33 films that were just 3 minutes long, commissioned from world cinema directors to celebrate the movie theater. and this is Thais. So the voiceover is very soft-spoken. It sort of feels like you're in the movie theater with him as he's whispering to you about his experience. So Tsai Ming-liang's short film, It's a Dream, contains in nucleo his understanding of cinema as a dreamlike state and his reflection on the cinema as a space so saturated with memory and cruisy queer desire that it can feel disorienting. A temporally disorienting autobiographical voiceover opens the film. I dreamt of my father as a young man. He woke me in the middle of the night. We ate durians together. My mother was there too. She was already an old lady. The soft-spoken voiceover places us within this distinct yet ghostly space. The family members are camped out in the aisle of a now derelict movie theater in Malaysia, the country where Tsai was born. A portable gas lamp illuminates Tsai's longtime male muse, Li Kangsheng, playing Tsai's father as a young man, squatting on the ground, splitting and sharing out. Over a shot of a framed portrait that sits in one of the cinema chairs, the narration continues, still in a hushed tone. This is my maternal grandmother. She loved the movies. Every time she took me to the cinema, she'd buy me pears on a skewer. The film thus harks back to both his own past experiences watching films in Malaysia with his maternal grandmother and to the past of Chinese language cinemas, especially the musicals and martial arts pictures that Tsai pays homage to queerly in several of his films. An old-fashioned Mandarin pop song from the 1940s plays over the remainder of the shots from It's a Dream, all of which feature characters facing towards an unseen movie screen, leading us to speculate as to whether it might be the diegetic sound, the soundtrack of the film that they are watching, but which we cannot see. The song features melancholy and philosophical lyrics. Last night the moon was pale and mesmerizing. Even the pine forest held its breath. I thought of you in my dream. My mind was caught between sadness and joy. Tonight the moon is bright like a mirror as we stroll together under the bridge. Let me ask you, in my dream, is this a dream or reality? So while the song plays, we see actors who appeared but didn't meet on screen in Tsai's first feature film set in Malaysia, I Don't Want to Sleep Alone from 2006. We observe a woman, Pearly Chua, eating pears on a skewer, and then without turning her head, she reaches the skewer back to the row behind her to share the sliced pears with a man, Norman bin Aton, who takes bites between puffs of a cigarette. Picking up the cigarette motif, we see a shot of Li Kangsheng lighting a cigarette, with the boy seated next to him snacking from a paper packet. And the final shot features only the family members, including the portrait of the maternal grandmother, seated together in one row, facing the screen in an otherwise empty movie theater. The film acts as a kind of mirror for contemplating film spectatorship and Tsai's own past, caught between sadness and joy. It's a Dream condenses many of the central themes and motifs of Tsai's entire body of work: melancholy, nostalgia, familial intimacy, cruising, dreaming, and both temporal and spatial disorientation. It juxtaposes discontinuous generational time, including the afterlife and the temporal distortion of age and dreams, with apparently continuous screen time, and employs shifting spatial continuity in a nonetheless surreal location that acts as a kind of heterotopia. This reflexive form of filmmaking, the film within a film in which the moon is bright like a mirror, or more generally films about filmmaking and film viewing, can be considered in terms of what Gilles Deleuze calls the work in the mirror or the work in the seed. What I'm calling queer metacinema holds up a mirror to the cinema and its audience, but can also act like a seed encapsulating the queer potentiality of this space. Tsai provocatively mixes the familial scene of relatives with the erotic cruising of strangers in the movie theater, recalling his provocative mixture of anonymous bathhouse cruising and filial relations in his early film, The River, from 1997. He stages his complex vision of ethical relations via the shot of the woman sharing pears on a skewer with a man in the row behind her without looking at him. This is one of many scenes in Tsai's body of work in which he queers heterosexual relations via anonymity, cruising, female agency, and the eroticization of fruit. For those who've seen his other films, fruit is a running sexualized motif. The pears on the skewer nostalgically reference the food enjoyed with his maternal grandmother, but the durian is even more evocative as a notoriously culturally specific food. How many people here have tried durian? So it's prohibited from certain enclosed spaces due to its pungent aroma throughout Southeast Asia, but it's also a marker of connoisseurship in Southeast Asia, especially in Malaysia. So It's a Dream overlays motifs from I Don't Want to Sleep Alone, his film about spatial and sexual disorientation in Malaysia's capital, Kuala Lumpur, with Tsai's meta-cinematic film Goodbye Dragon Inn from 2003, a melancholy ode to a cruisy old Taipei movie theater at its last screening. In an interview, Tsai explained how with Goodbye Dragon Inn, I felt like it was the theater that was calling to me to make the film. That theater reminded me of my experiences growing up in Malaysia. At that time, there were 7 or 8 grand theaters like that have disappeared one by one over the last few years. Prior to making Dragon Inn, I was having this recurring dream of a particular theater in Malaysia. It's almost like these images of childhood wouldn't let me go. So Goodbye Dragon Inn, or It's a Dream, Goodbye Dragon Inn and these now closed or demolished theaters play a central role in Saw Chiang-Gwen's documentary Past Present regarding Tsai's poetics of space. The documentary explores Tsai's relationship to movie theaters, especially those in Kuching and Sarawak, Malaysia, where Tsai was raised by his grandparents who took him to the movies almost every day. Recalling the framed portrait of his maternal grandmother in It's a Dream, we learn that relatives will place such portraits in theater seats as a kind of gift to their lost loved ones who can continue to watch films. By paying melancholy homage to the cinematic past, Tsai thus suggests how private and public, personal and cultural cinema histories are deeply entangled. It's a Dream was originally part of the meta-cinematic compilation film Chacun son cinéma, To Each His Own Cinema, or that little thrill when the light goes out and the film starts, which was a series of 3-minute films by world cinema directors commissioned to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Cannes Film Festival. In Chacun son cinéma, something akin to a genuine cinema fetish emerges, beyond cliches of cinephilia, whether in the strictly Freudian formula of, I know cinema is dead, but still I love it, or in the repeated motif of the motion picture theater's intimate connection with sexuality, its dark atmosphere saturated with desire, arousal, and contact. Roland Barthes' short essay, Leaving the Movie Theater, describes the cinema, which for Barthes connotes the hall itself, in precisely these cruisy terms. But Barthes also describes the state of his body as it wakes from the dream and hypnosis of the movies, leaving the theater feeling sleepy. In my book, I elaborate each of these affects and their interrelations, feeling sleepy, feeling cruisy, and feeling melancholy. Spaces like movie theaters induce such affective states or moods in the bodies of the audience members. Feeling cruisy suggests a mode of erotic availability, of openness and attentiveness within spaces that blur public and private. Feeling sleepy suggests exhaustion from labor chiefly, but also the work of being a subject. Sleeping into a soporific state or into a dream can feel like a relief or a release from individuation, what Jonathan Crary calls the shallow subjectivities that one inhabits and manages by day, or the routine coordinates of identity, time, and place. Feeling melancholy suggests a different kind of loss and has for the most part been understood in terms of temporality, being at odds with the present in a state of grief, but might also be understood in terms of place and space. For instance, these theaters that Tsai continues to grieve in the quote above, suggesting that they won't let him go. Each of these affects are linked in a kind of relay by Tsai's queering of cinematic space. The affective landscape of Tsai's body of work suggests new ways of understanding the way that space and sexuality affect one another. Tsai has revised and extended It's a Dream in expanded cinema installations using the chairs from the movie theater in Malaysia, but installed facing each other, mise on a beam, and exhibited in Venice, in Rotterdam, and in Taipei. It's a move to a museum that we can also see in Stray Dogs at the Museum, Tsai Ming-liang's solo exhibition, which was a sleepover in an art museum, which is absolutely brilliant idea. I mean, people are actually like in sleeping bags while the films are streaming for 24 hours. But Tsai's particular approach not only expands cinema beyond the screen or ambivalently beyond the movie theater, suggesting Tsai's sense of melancholy for lost venues and audiences that he hopes to regain, often selling tickets himself to students on the street, but it also expands the other spaces that Tsai has worked to invest with wayward, cruisy, and queer potential. This is definitely the case for Days. I watched Tsai selling tickets on the street for months, and he'd use social media to announce various campus visits, and he was really like, it's a very old school style of salesmanship. Days finally did open in Taiwan in 2023, along with an exhibition at the Museum of National Taipei University of Education, or MoNTUE, from October 2023 to January 2024. So that's what I want to talk about in the next part of this presentation is Tsai Ming-liang's Days. So the Queer Teddy Award-winning Days features liminal, queer, cross-class, inter-Asian, and intergenerational and commercial sexual relationship between Lee and a Laotian migrant in Thailand, Anong Hong Hangsi. Their massage session with a happy ending is filmed in a Bangkok hotel room, followed by a shared meal in a nearby restaurant. The bounded intimacy of Days portrays queer sex work as a form of care work, returning to treatments for Lee's actual neck pain featured in The River in 1997. Tsai's latest film thus raises issues of diasporic and queer temporality and labor, what Elizabeth Bernstein calls bounded authenticity in Temporarily Yours, Intimacy, Authenticity, and the Commerce of Sex, and what Chris Berry has called stranger intimacy within Tsai's films and queer culture. Days invites us to consider queer time and place, plus timing and space, in Tsai's relation to his actors, to queer cinema, and to migrant sex work. In an interview with Darren Hughes titled A State of Uncertainty, Tsai explains how his approach to filming Days differed greatly from other films, starting with a scenario, a script, or a concept. As Hughes explains, the process meant in practice collecting images of Lee and Anong, recording sync sound, and only later shaping the footage into something resembling a narrative, cross-cutting between their separate lives. These two isolated and lonely characters converge 1 hour into the film, where Lee and Anong have a prearranged meeting for a massage session in a hotel room in Bangkok. Anong joins Lee and, quote, gives him a massage session that ends with masturbation and a passionate kiss, all in real time, 2 shots lasting just under 20 minutes. It's a rare moment of relatively uncomplicated connection and pleasure in Tsai's filmography, which seems miraculous somehow. The exchange is no less poignant for being transactional, Hughes argues. So in what follows, I want to gloss and expand on that last observation. Let's begin with a happy ending. Happy ending is a well-known term for a massage that ends in masturbation and orgasm, but as many viewers and critics noted, it also fits Tsai's film. It's indeed rare to see sex happy and consummated in Tsai's body of work. The film potentially reinforces a sex tourist stereotype about Bangkok, the global tourist gaze at red light districts, imbricated in colonial and post-colonial temporality. However, Anong's story is not unique among migrant laborers, especially queer and trans migrants, for whom sex work is an important means of making a living as a quote-unquote illegal worker. So after they shower together, with Anong lathering and washing Lee's body, Lee pays Anong in cash that he had carefully stashed in a drawer and then leads him by the hand to sit on the bed. He offers him a glass of water, a motif which over the course of Tsai's filmography has come to symbolize an act of love. It's another one of these recurring motifs from film to film. And then he gives him a gift, a music box which plays Terry's theme from Charlie Chaplin's Limelight from 1952, a song which Tsai has used before in a version with Mandarin lyrics in the dreamlike ending of I Don't Want to Sleep Alone, thus creating another rewarding fold of meaning in his body of work for knowing fans. There's a kind of reward in being able to recognize the repetition of these motifs. So using Chaplin's swan song, Limelight, as an intertext carries with it multiple meanings. It's a melancholy film about aging, the life cycle of performing artists, a tramp vaudeville performer, and a ballerina, hysterical illness linked to the ballerina's shame over her dance lessons being paid for by her sister's sex work, and the end of a career. Chaplin casts his own son as the rival for the ballerina's affections, but also the value of truth in a life dedicated to art. Tsai thus identifies with Chaplin, moreover Chaplin at his most Buddhist philosophically, and the cycle of his own actors recalls the opening title card of Chaplin's film, the glamour of limelight from which age must pass as youth enters. When Anong leaves, Lee chases after him and they share one meal before returning to their lonely lives back home. Watching the two men eat together, which Hughes reads along with the music box scene as more paternal and tender, we might instead recall Michel Foucault's interview about men of different ages sharing their time and their meals together, friendship as a way of life, where he asks, quote, "What is it to be naked among men, outside of institutional relations, family, profession, and obligatory camaraderie? It's a desire and uneasiness, a desire in uneasiness that exists among a lot of people," end quote. We can also connect this to Tsai and Lee's recorded career retrospective conversation Afternoon from 2015, in which Tsai came out as gay on film, kind of for the record, and then they discussed how they work and live together. In Roland Barthes' How to Live Together, he proposes the notion of idiorhythmy, the sometimes difficult work of respecting people's different rhythms or pacing in the way they live. Even when Tsai and Lee do talk about family and profession, they suggest a kind of queer kinship that exceeds the family, or that queers notions of friendship and family, expressing desire in uneasiness. So receiving the Queer Teddy Award in Berlin, Tsai expressed his pride that Taiwan is the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, though his film is not about a homonormative couple, as I've emphasized. Some narratives about gay marriage in Asia frame the issue as a matter of catching up to the West. Thailand recently became the next country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. So it's worth considering the freighted meaning of the film's three locations, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Thailand. And perhaps it's like Wong Kar-wai's timely comparison of British to China handover Hong Kong to Taiwan and Argentina in his melancholy gay love affair breakup story, Happy Together from 1997. How many people here have seen Happy Together? So this image is Hong Kong as imagined upside down, and then it ends at the Taipei MRT at the end. So these geopolitical locations also encourage us to consider other legal fights over democracy and human rights and over the decriminalization of sex work in each place and space. So these are some images of Southeast Asian sex worker organizing around decriminalization. Elizabeth Bernstein's Temporarily Yours represents a major advance in thinking about commercial sex in terms of what she calls bounded authenticity, to understand how sex work in the girlfriend experience involves contractually bounded intimacy and emotional labor, not unlike other caring service professions, for example, home health aides, under neoliberalism. This is one way of understanding why, as Hughes argues, the intimacy between Lee and Anong is no less poignant for being transactional. Days is about sex work as a form of care work. These practices of care involve what Talia Schaefer identifies as temporality, feeling temporally askew, and performativity of emotional labor in feminist ethics of care, relevant to studies of disability and sex work. Like the cover of Temporarily Yours, a hotel bedside table with a drawn curtain, telephone, and glass of water, the hotel room setting in Bangkok is bathed in a warm glow from the red curtains in the background, and as the camera framing of the two men's bodies is adjusted during the massage session, becomes what Gilles Deleuze in Cinema 2, the time image, refers to as any space whatever. We never forget that Lee and Anong's session is paid work in a rented room. Anong is on the clock like Lizzie Borden's Working Girls from 1986. And the scene of this full-body massage with a happy ending, including the details of the towel laid on the bed, the cash payment, the small sentimental gift as a tip, and the surprise of a meal together near the hotel at a Chinese rice porridge restaurant. I've actually been there. It's a Michelin star rated congee restaurant. They are as mundane as they are erotic, aestheticized, and intimate. Anong's movements indicate practiced muscle memory, as we hear the massage oil lubricant plastic bottle repeatedly click open and closed. What Song Hui Lim has noted are frequently uncomfortable sounds or awkward noises associated with sex in Tsai's films. We're made more aware of duration in relation to this laboring body. In Hughes' interview with Anong and during a Q&A at the Harvard Film Archive screening of Days, Anong has described the life of a migrant Lao laborer in Bangkok and how his days seem to blur together, cooking meals, working, sleeping, the repeated daily activities that we see in Days. Here it's worth considering the translation of the film's title and the lack of plurals in the Chinese, like Rizi could mean day or days. Many of the shots in Days depict Anong shirtless and in shorts, squatting on the floor and preparing fish and vegetables in his kitchen and bathroom in multiple colorful plastic tubs and heating coals for steaming rice. We can compare this migrant laborer Anong's cooking and sleeping routine between his jobs at a night market selling cheap clothing and as an out-call masseur to Chantal Ackerman's slow cinema masterpiece, Jean Dielman, which many people during the pandemic kind of revisited because we all knew this experience of our daily routines in this kind of claustrophobic setting. It's the tedious domestic labor of food preparation, peeling potatoes between clients. So Tsai's discovery of the young unprofessional actor Lee and his working relationship with him over 3 decades has meant that his cinema has acted as a study of Lee's aging body. Lee originally played Shao Kang, or Little Kang, the rebellious son with veteran actor Miao Tian playing his father. But in It's a Dream, Lee plays Tsai's own father in a dream. And in Visage, he plays a directorial double for Tsai. And in Days, Hughes notes that he's almost taken the place of the father figure played by Miao Tian. Lee says, "I've reached the age of 51, and looking at Anong, I see I have become the father figure, and Anong is like my kid. So yes, I do find some sort of connection with Miao Tian." As Hughes notes of Days, a generation has passed before us on screen. The cycle is repeating with Anong. And then suddenly you realize you're old, Tsai told me with a grin. Tsai's films have worked persistently to queer filial relations and thus Confucian ideals of filial piety since his provocative staging of accidental gay incest in a sauna in the river. And this incestuous resonance is kind of glossed over in Lee's remarks on Anong being like his son. But we should also consider Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick and Jack Halberstam's insistence on the way that queer temporality of living in a queer time and place defies the expectations and the limitations of heteronormative generational time. Tsai's films also reflect on trajectories away from the family. Tsai's move from a life raised by his grandparents in Malaysia to that of a film student in Taiwan at a crucial transitional moment during marking the end of martial law, and the migrant trajectory of Anong from Laos to Thailand, building on Tsai's earlier focus on migrant laborers in Malaysia in I Don't Want to Sleep Alone. Tsai's recent film Back Home, or Hui Jia from 2025, follows Anong on a return trip to Laos. So such queer diasporic movements also problematize intercultural linguistic communication, which explains why none of the characters in Sleep speak a word to each other, and Days starts with a title card explaining this film is intentionally unsubtitled. With Anong possibly becoming Tsai's new male muse, including the tropes of being discovered, of being given a remarkable opportunity to travel the world with him to awards ceremonies and film retrospectives in Berlin, US, Paris, and Taiwan, we see that indeed the cycle is repeating. So I want to show one more short film, which is called The Night. If you could hit the lights for me, James. Thanks very much. And this is set in Hong Kong. And this is just the trailer. So The Night indexes Tsai Ming-liang's shifting relationship to Hong Kong. Tsai grew up in the Chinese diaspora community in Malaysia in the 1950s and 60s, watching older studio movies, swordsman pictures, and musicals from Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Taiwan. He later paid homage to the genres, actors, and singers of these films in Goodbye Dragon Inn and in The Hole, which is another really fascinating film to rewatch after the pandemic. He said that he appreciates this older era of Mandarin popular song for its oversized emotions and sincere, passionate longing, which you can hear in the song that he chooses to play at the end of The Night, The Beautiful Night is Slipping Away. As I've mentioned, Tsai officially announced his retirement from making commercial films after making 10 films, the final of which was Stray Dogs in 2013, made with the intention of exhibiting it at the museum at this overnight sleepover, Stray Dogs at the Museum. But he's been remarkably productive since he announced his retirement. Tsai has made a series of short site-specific Walker films featuring his male muse Li Kangsheng dressed as a Buddhist monk, Xuanzang, walking at a snail's pace, surrounded by bystanders in various global cities, including a Walker film shot in Hong Kong. And he recently made one that was shot in DC. It was fascinating to be in Taiwan watching that film be exhibited at the Golden Horse, actually at the Taipei Film Festival. But The Night, it feels kind of like a continuation of the Walker series, but minus the walking monk figure. Instead, it's all bystanders and setting. It feels like a return to the classic modernist genre of avant-garde and documentary cinema, the city symphony, like Man with a Movie Camera, Rain. But in this case, it also feels like a city elegy from a Taiwan-based ethnically Chinese filmmaker paying homage to a city forever changed by the aftermath of Hong Kong's handover to the People's Republic of China in 1997 and the umbrella movement in defense of Hong Kong democracy and the contemporary 2019-2020 anti-extradition law protests, the largest demonstration in Hong Kong's history, resulting in the retraction of the extradition law, but the greater clampdown on democracy and protest in the Hong Kong national security law. All of the signs of this just show up in the form of traces in the environment, graffiti, flyers, and Lenin walls. Like the recent COVID-19 lockdown white paper protests in the PRC, Tsai here explores the eloquence of emptiness and how such an apparently blank space can speak. In a final entry of Roland Barthes by Roland Barthes, Barthes asks himself rhetorically, and afterward, what to write now? Can you still write anything? And he answers, one writes with one's desire, and I'm not through desiring. Inspired by this framing, I helped organize a panel at the Society for Cinema and Media Studies with Beth Tsai, Corrado Neri, and Timmy Chen to look at the remarkably productive post-retirement period of Tsai Ming-liang, work produced after Tsai announced his retirement from commercial feature filmmaking with his allegedly final film Stray Dogs. As Evan Morgan noted in 2020, the 7 years since Stray Dogs, he's been shown himself to be a rather active retiree, signing his name to no fewer than 10 moving image works, half of which near or clear feature-length status, and proving that a restless, desirous artistic mind never fully stops, even if it feels compelled to slow down. This slowing down, in fact, becomes a major theme and method in Tsai and Lee's collaborations on duration-based performances and films in the Walker series from 2012 to the present. Tsai has also created a VR film, The Deserted, from 2017, a documentary, Your Face, from 2018, in what Elena Gorfinkel identifies as his late digital style. In 2020, Tsai released a feature-length film, Days, in Taiwan, and it was the subject of this major retrospective at MoNTUE. So the time is thus ripe to assess this remarkably productive post-retirement career and how, like Barthes, he's not through desiring. Tsai's slow cinema has frequently been understood as preoccupied with exhaustion, grief, and alienation, but Timmy Chen has suggested that with Days, we might reorient our understanding to think about Tsai's cinema not as a cinema of alienation, but as a cinema of connection and care. This reparative revision can be seen in Tsai's recent reflections on the pandemic in a film commissioned by the Centre Pompidou, Where Do You Stand, Tsai Ming-liang, from 2020. Mostly filmed at the home that Tsai shares with Lee in the ruins of an abandoned building that adjoin it. Intertitles explain Tsai's love of old chairs, his installation art practices, his recent return to amateur painting during the pandemic. Quote, the pandemic began soon after I made Days. The world seemed to have come to a stop. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. I painted Kang and Anong, my two actors. Anong was stuck in his home country of Laos. I missed him very much. I also painted myself. These intertitles punctuate shots of Tsai's avowedly amateur paintings of his actors and scenes from Days, and a promotional image of Tsai sitting next to Anong on a bench, propped up on bricks above puddles of muddy water, and then Tsai walking through this rather haunted, ruined gallery in flip-flops trailed by a cameraman who we learn in the credits is Anong. These intertitles, paintings, and credits speak to a skewed and queer temporality and a queer form of domesticity that was further elaborated in Tsai's exhibition at the Museum of National Taipei University of Education, which corresponded with the long-awaited release of Days in theaters all over Taiwan. So taking up all 3 floors of the small on-campus museum with Tsai's paintings, works on paper, old chairs and luggage, music boxes and video installations, plus several public programs, Tsai Ming-liang's Days can be considered a careful staging of queer public and private intimacy, domesticity, and care. One public program included a music listening session where Tsai played his favorite old Mandarin songs from classic films popular throughout the Sinophone East and Southeast Asia that he's known for incorporating into his own films. The public programming also included a cooking demonstration, Tsai and Anong's delectable relationship, named after a Taiwanese television drama, where they made Malaysian and Lao food for the public. Anong made green papaya salad that he's shown preparing in Days, which Tsai had found so beautiful and felt compelled to record on video, and ended by singing a Lao song. The basement gallery of MoNTUE featured looped projections ranging from what looked like almost like home movies of Tsai with Lee, including a strange mixture of the artistic, medical, amorous, and maternal gaze in footage of Lee receiving acupuncture treatments at clinics in Taiwan and Hong Kong, sleeping while wearing a neck brace on the Tokyo Shinkansen, and playing with cats in the backyard of the home that he shares with Tsai, footage of Tsai with Lee after he experienced a minor stroke, and footage of Anong on the phone, unsubtitled but with an explanation written in Tsai's Chinese handwriting on the gallery wall. Quote, he recounts being detained and inspected by the police of Bangkok. They threatened to bring him into the station for not having his ID, but fortunately a friend was able to rush back to their dorm and bring his ID, end quote. Along with Where Do You Stand, Tsai Ming-liang. I wanted to conclude with this expanded cinema at the museum to suggest that Tsai's recent artistic production in his post-retirement period should be understood not just as a representation of disability or a representation of care, but instead as a staging of care and disability in the gallery space in a sensory, affecting, and effective way to directly involve the public, directly in a sense of interdependence. Tsai Ming-liang's intimate public worlds are remarkably queer in the way that they dislodge the domestic from the familial and reproductive imperatives, as we see in Rawang, Anong, and Tsai's caregiving for Lee's disabled body, in ways that reopen the affective and relational virtualities via queer, slantwise position of the filmmaker and the actors and spectators, and the diagonal lines in the social fabric which allow such virtualities, including a promiscuous ethics of care, to come to light. This forms part of my next book-length project, which is called Inter-Asia Network Films and Cosmopolitan Sex Workers, inspired by feminist anthropology on sex workers as embodying a form of cosmopolitanism from below. I'm thinking of the converging and diverging fates of Lee and Anong as a kind of X that marks the smallest building block of a network narrative, which we can then kind of scale up to much more elaborate network narratives. And my case study films are all specifically about East and Southeast Asian migrant sex workers. But I'm happy to explain a little bit more in the Q&A, but I think I'll stop there. Thanks very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to questions from the audience.
It's an incredible talk, and I'm really looking forward to this talk. And while rereading your book, actually, it was a moment of enlightenment, but at the same time, it was a moment of frustration because okay, Professor Villiers did everything I wanted to say. So.
This happens to me all the time.
Right. Okay. Actually, I was in Bangkok last summer, and one of the reasons why I visited Bangkok is to visit the film shooting locations of many Thai horror films. But at the same time, I also went to see the shooting locations of Days.
Yeah.
It was really fun. So I was literally cruising through the city,
yep.
Not as gay traveler or gay tourist, but as cinephile traveler,
yeah.
Or cinephile tourist. And when I went to the a bus stop, I remember
where Anong waits, which has now been replaced.
Right. Yeah.
I went to the same place.
Yeah. It was very interesting because the a bus stop is or the bus stop in end sequence when in which Anong plays with
the music box,
right?
Yeah.
That's a part of the Siloam district, and Siloam, a neighborhood, is famous gay neighborhood. So Anong is as a gay sex worker who does not belong to the gay district. Is actually playing the music box there, which is fantabulous.
Yeah.
A memory to me, and I found it really compelling, especially because of that sense of isolation. Okay, so let me stop here. I'll briefly respond to your talk with discussion points and related questions, and then we'll open the floor to questions. In this talk, you structured the first part to be dedicated to your book, or mostly to Tsai's pre-retirement films, and the latter part to your current project, or to Tsai's post-retirement expanded cinema. One thing I found truly compelling about your talk is that this shift in Tsai's filmmaking is not only a matter of change in filmmaking or distribution modality, but also reflects Tsai's ongoing interest in care, disability, and interdependency, which I fully concur. Let me complicate our discussion a little bit more, particularly about cruising. I also used the term cruising when I visited Bangkok. When thinking about cruising, I cannot help but resort to Leo Bersani's foundational essay, Associability in Cruising. According to Bersani, cruising is a cultural training in impersonal intimacy, end quote. He argues that in the practice of cruising, we engage ourselves in completely impersonal sociability, devoid of mutual interest in identity, class, or other individual characteristics. Bersani consistently uses the term associability instead of sociality. As sociability refers to an anonymous form of relationality that does not entail or induce any alliance, solidarity, or care. But as you precisely pointed out in your talk and also in your book, and as you saw in Tsai's films, particularly in What Time Is It There and Days, the impersonal intimacy sometimes comes with a mutual care for strangers and considerations for disabled bodies. The changing platform for Tsai's films during his post-retirement era makes me wonder whether the art museums or other exhibition venues really foster the cruising of care or not. Unlike the movie viewing experience in a movie theater, museum goers have more freedom to stroll around and not become a part of the whole media practice called the cinema. In other words, museum goers may become more individuals than movie goers who voluntarily force themselves into a mess in the movie theaters. So 2 years ago, I was in Seoul, South Korea, and the Korean Film Archive organized a special exhibition titled Moving Portraits, dedicated to Tsai Ming-liang's short films and media installations. So the Korean Film Archive has its own cinematheques. While there's an exhibition going on the first floor, so Tsai's films were actually screened in movie theaters, the underground, which was a very bizarre experience for me. So I thought it was very interesting as I cruised through the exhibition of Tsai's post-retirement films, and then sat on the chair of the cinematheque watching his pre-retirement films. This made me wonder what's the meaning of cinema in times of streaming services, and how Tsai has negotiated this contradiction. So do you think these more personal or more individual museum goers can be cruisers of care, as you also address in your talk? So that's my first question. And if I abuse my position as a moderator and ask another question, he said he retired, but he hasn't retired actually, right? As you also mentioned, he made lots of fantastic movies in collaboration with art museums and other museums. And what do you think about his projects? Though he doesn't actually name his films as cinema per se, but we still think it's a cinema, right? Even though it's exhibited in art house museums, and you also called it as expanded cinema as well, right? Is it really has he really retired from his filmmaking practices as an auteur? And do we need to see his films differently compared to his pre-retirement cinema?
Thank you very much for those questions. And I'm so glad to know, number one, that you also have these kind of pilgrimages to film locations, because I do this all the time. I've stayed in one of the Walker films is set in Tokyo, and I've stayed in the Capsule Hotel just because I wanted to see the specific Capsule Hotel that he filmed in for No Sleep. But yeah, I've also taken trips around Bangkok to visit the filming locations of Days, to also just figure out how far they walk from the hotel to this congee restaurant, and that kind of thing, that kind of mapping, I think is really interesting, and how he transforms the space, because it's simultaneously a realistic, almost quasi-documentary representation, and of course he's also manipulating it for screen and for cinema and through montage to create a narrative out of more documentary type footage. As far as the question of the art house museum becoming a kind of cruisy space, Bersani is of course also an inspiration, and John Paul Rico's book, The Logic of the Lure, in which he talks quite a bit about art practices that it could try to make the space of galleries feel cruisy, and so I think there is some potential, definitely with the sleepover, with people were in their sleeping bags. I think there was an attempt to really transform what we assume is the somewhat antiseptic and disciplinary space of the museum into this kind of freewheeling, space in which people were encouraged to actually fall asleep. I also saw all of the Walker films were exhibited, all 10 were exhibited in Kaohsiung at the Fine Arts Museum there. And I saw someone who fell asleep in one of the chairs. And there was a real sense of like freedom that this person didn't feel like, usually as you fall asleep at a museum, someone will prod you and, someone will get you out of the museum. But it was like, I think he had sort of said, whatever you do in this space is okay. And probably told the museum staff that people should be allowed to use the space as they wanted to. But yeah, I'm also very inspired by Samuel Delaney's work on porn theaters in Times Square as you said, kind of actually spaces of care, even though they're about anonymous strangers. That he says for an outsider, they might imagine that this is kind of there would be a lack of care, but in fact, some of the most touching moments of support and care and community that he witnessed were in porn theaters in Times Square, and that's kind of his challenge to those who argue that it was necessary to clean up New York to make it safer. So yeah, I think there is great potential. The other thing for thinking about care, and I mentioned like interrelatedness. I read the CARE manifesto when I was in Taiwan working on this, and they talk quite a bit about interdependence and the importance of how do you foster a sense of interdependence. COVID absolutely, I think, reminded people that we are all interdependent. But I like the fact that they suggest towards the end of that manifesto what they call a promiscuous ethics of care, because it allows it to, again, maybe be more amenable to Delaney and Bersani and Rico's queer understanding of sociability, as you said. So yeah, I think the shift post-retirement, part of it had to do with the fact that he was ill and that Li Kangsheng also got ill. And so it was an important way of stepping away from making the kind of pressure to make commercial films. That's also something musicians love to do. Musicians love to retire, announce their retirement, and then not really retire. So it's more of a way of kind of interacting with publicity and with what people expect from you. I'm also, the reason I bring in Roland Barthes here is that a lot of his courses at the Collège de France towards the end of his life were framed as a kind of stepping away from the expectations that he had placed on himself as an academic and in terms of publishing. So I'm really inspired by the fact that he also found it useful to talk about like retreat as a gesture in his course on the neutral and in his course on how to live together. So I find a lot of interesting affinities between Bart and Tsai. But yeah, I really appreciate the encouragement to think about this shift to the museum, because I do understand that museums don't have the same feeling as the movie theater, as being part of an audience. In the Leaving the Movie Theater essay by Barthes, he talks about like sliding down in your seats like you're in a bed and you're sort of sharing this embodied experience with a number of strangers in the dark. And it's hard to capture that in a museum. So I think that that Tsai has tried to infuse the space of a museum with that same thing. Again, in terms of Netflix and streaming, and Tsai has said that you would never see anyone in his films on the computer or with a phone, but in Days, Anong and Lee's transaction is entirely arranged via phone. So it's interesting to watch technology make its way into his work, sort of, maybe against his will, but it's like he has to acknowledge, because he's filming documentary reality, that that is how people socialize, is in a virtual way. So it'll be very interesting to sort of see whether in his more recent work, whether he acknowledges that there's this kind of parallel level of sociality with social media. Yeah.
So do you think the COVID-19 also affected his attitudes towards the filmmaking?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why even just the delay in the release time of COVID meant that Days was screened at like the Lincoln Center on a film festival online. That's how I watched it at home. And there was that long delay of when is it going to finally be released? When can he finally show it in Taiwan? I think that's inspired him to then go and sell tickets on the street. That he was like, no one is going to see this film. I need to introduce this to a younger generation. So he's kind of like an evangelist for his own work, and felt he needed physically to be present to do that.
Great.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Why don't we open the floor to questions?
I have so many questions. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for the talk. You mentioned a number of things which I want to link together, and maybe at the end there is a question. I hope so, but I'm not sure. Care, cruising, and pilgrimage. All being, as I see it, asking for some kind of empathetic sharing in whatever the director is doing. All I could do was pilgrimage, and I can say that I think it's a rather outsider's form of dealing with things, right? I want to be there, but I really couldn't be, so I'm doing the best thing that I can do. Cruising, to the best of how I understand it, is kind of in the middle. It's both sharing and taking part of the scene, and at the same time also knowing that these are spaces of pilgrimage, at least to a certain community.
Yeah.
Right. And then there is care, which is okay. You have to think my way. You have to really be me in order to understand the essence of the kind of pain and whatever that I'm going through.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering. Okay. And then I wonder how this connects to retirement, right? To the question of, okay, how much am I able to bring my audience into my world as a director? So it's a very open.
No, yeah, I appreciate the connections. And actually, the word cruisy is, did that pick up on the audio? Should we repeat the question? Great. So I was using the word cruisy rather than the word cruising, in part because gay guides used to indicate like this park is cruisy, this bar is cruisy. And it's a way of, again, kind of like as you said, a kind of pilgrimage of like, this is a worthwhile pilgrimage to go to this particular park. And it's kind of, again, like blurring the public and private, and creating a kind of anonymous community, a temporary community that also reminds me of the Elizabeth Bernstein's remarks about sex work as a kind of bounded authenticity, right? It's kind of stopped short on either side by contract, but it doesn't mean that it's not intimate, that it's not caring, but it's just very clear to the partners that it is paid labor and that it will, that there's a kind of, again, a boundedness to it. So I think that there are a lot of interesting affinities between care as a bounded activity, sex as a bounded activity, cruising as a bounded activity, that shouldn't be discounted as inauthentic or not really intimacy, but to just acknowledge that it is kind of, I think towards the end I was quoting this Foucault idea of like virtualities, and also diagonal lines, which was Foucault's argument about what homosexuality enables is a kind of diagonal line through the social fabric. And what I think is important about Days is that he's not acting like Anong and Lee are equals. In fact, he makes it very clear that Lee is able to travel, that he's traveled to Taipei, Hong Kong, and Thailand as a tourist and seeking medical treatment, and that Anong is a migrant, but that he's also stuck. He's kind of stuck on the street. He's stuck with his ID, this panic about his ID. So again, it's a diagonal rather than a vertical or a horizontal relation that acknowledges that there are big differences of class, big differences of mobility. And I think that that's, again, the point taken from Delaney about cruising in Times Square, is that it was not necessarily, he doesn't want to paint too rosy a picture or too utopian a picture, but that he acknowledges that it's one of the few places where interclass contact could happen, and that's what he values about cities, is that cities create interclass contact, and that those who don't like cities don't like interclass contact. So yeah, I think I'll have to develop in the later book project. I'm talking more about the questions of sex worker migration and sex worker labor that acknowledge that this is, again, diagonal rather than vertical or horizontal equal relationships. Thanks.
Thank you for the wonderful talk, Professor.
Thank you.
I also was struck by the concept of bounded intimacy, I believe that you drew from
Bernstein. Yeah.
Yes. And I believe the book was titled Temporarily Yours.
Yeah.
As your talk and the cover image alluded, the boundedness is spatial as well.
Yeah.
Like the hotel room, like
right.
You leave your stranger. And I remember the introduction to the book sort of mentioning rented apartments and hotel rooms in addition to movie theaters as examples of these sort of liminal rooms that Tsai Ming-liang likes to include in his work. So my actual question is then, how do you see or interpret that in Days, Li Gangxing's character like runs after Anong and they go for a meal together, because on the one hand, this is, I guess,
the bounded thing is ended.
Familiar, romantic trope, like running after someone at the airport when you're supposed to go your separate ways. But also, what does it mean in terms of this spatial, like the breaking and expansion, I guess, of spatial boundaries?
That's a great question, and I'll go back to the image that just has the restaurant there. So I think it's also interesting that they choose this image because it's ethnically and spatially ambiguous, right? Because it's got the kind of recognizable Chinese lanterns, and like I said, there's the Michelin things in the background, and there's a sign in Chinese, English, and Thai. So yeah, I think there is something interesting that's also where they decide to share this meal together. And I was really inspired by Foucault's Friendship as a Way of Life because he mentions sharing a meal together as one of these spaces that is kind of like a form of bond or sign of friendship that is not necessarily a socially reinforced one in terms of like, camaraderie, etc. But yeah, I think it is, you're right, there's a kind of romance movie trope of like the end of Lost in Translation or something where they like run after each other. But it's really interesting that this is, and it could be like a sentimental moment, but it's a long shot. And they don't speak, right? Or we don't see them speaking. And the only words that they do speak are in English. But I think that most of it is kind of wordless. And then he's very deliberate about the fact that it's not subtitled. So I think it does actually weirdly remind me of Lost in Translation because we don't get to hear what he whispers. But yeah, it's helpful for me to maybe think about what the film tropes are, but how that also maybe spills over the boundaries that like he paid for his time, but then, and he gives him this music box. The other thing that I didn't really convey is that when he gives him the music box, it's a really interesting long duration moment because you have no idea how long Anong is going to keep playing this music box, and it's kind of like for too long, but it's a really classic Tsai thing is to just go exactly a little bit longer than you think. In Goodbye Dragon Inn as well, the like shot of the empty theater is held for just a little bit too long, and apparently his camera crew were like, are we gonna cut? Like, so yeah, I think that there is something, an interesting sense of overspilling what you expect would be the duration. But I hadn't thought about making the connection to Bernstein's idea of temporarily yours and thinking about time and that space of the meal afterwards. Thank you.
If I may follow up on that. So that end sequence is really memorable because Anong is playing the music box in front of the billboard.
Yeah,
it's empty.
Yeah,
so it resembles the movie screen.
It does look like a movie screen. Yeah.
Yeah. So and the Charlie Chaplin, and then so it's that end sequence itself is a kind of Anong is a younger generation. I mean, though he's a migrant worker and sex worker. But at the same time, so Tsai's cinephile like a desire or hope is actually like materialized in that end sequence. So I found it very interesting too.
And actually, the music box was a gift from Tsai's producer, but it then became a prop in the film. But yeah, I think he bought it at the Eye Museum in Amsterdam.
Okay, and then we have probably one more question online.
Yeah, so I would particularly, I'm really taken by the use of sleepy in your title because I think it really gets at the, like a certain connection or a certain effect that not just Tsai's filmography, but also like slow cinema as a whole has on a given film's relationship with the viewer's like physical response to what they're watching, because obviously when we think of like body genres, we think of like Linda Williams more traditionally with horror and melodrama, and there are these very like stark examples of crying and shrieking and all of these things. But in more contemporary discourse, particularly with slow cinema in the context of like the digital and the post-cinematic, which you talk about quite a bit in your presentation, certain folks have argued that slow cinema is a body genre, but in a more subtle way because it makes the viewer yawn. It makes the viewer fall asleep. Like you talk about, it makes the viewer physically move their mouse to close the browser on their computer. And so, this is admittedly kind of an open-ended question, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on the kind of queer implications in regard to the this specific brand of affect that slow cinema has.
I really appreciate that question. And I was thinking back to Warhol's films very famously, right? Where Warhol said that his films allow the audience to get more acquainted with themselves. Which I think is what the feeling is of watching slow cinema, that you're suddenly aware of how you're sitting in your chair and whether you feel sleepy and whether you need a coffee or whether you're allowed to get up and come back. And I think thinking about it as a body genre really works, and I think Warhol was thinking of it that way too. So Your Face, the Tsai film that is the most Warholian, it's these kind of close-up shots of elderly inhabitants of Taipei, and then the last shot is of Li Kangsheng. That one I've written a little bit about. Again, thinking about the audience's relationship to duration and also the digital. So it allows for the camera to run for much longer periods of time. Warhol's like screen tests were like the length of the reel, but then he would play them in a way that made them sort of slow down, so they were a little bit longer than it took to film them. But yeah, I think sleepiness also just in terms of discipline. So audiences generally and cinephiles especially might be embarrassed to admit that they fall asleep during movies. But Tsai has been he will always reassure his audience, especially actually with Stray Dogs. He said if you fall asleep, it's fine, and it's kind of like you give permission to the audience to fall asleep, and he did that with the sleepover at the museum as well. But yeah, I liked the ambiguity of the word sleepy. That sleepy isn't the same thing as sleeping, but it's kind of it's very much an embodied affect, and it's one that you become aware of, and it also maybe allows for the multiple moments of dream states and fantasy sequences in his films and in Apichatpong's films as well. He also did the Sleep Cinema Hotel and other films that are about kind of dreaming and the blurry line between reality and dream or fantasy. So I think sleepiness also kind of like initiates you into that sort of suspension of disbelief or like a more open state to this kind of dream sequences.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a question online. I'm going to read from Junyoung Kim. Is there a particular topic that you would like to have addressed in this book that perhaps you didn't quite fit? That perhaps just didn't quite fit. And the second one is, I'm curious to hear more on your upcoming research on sex work, sex tourism, and cosmopolitanism. Could you expand on your analysis of care in this context?
Sure. Thank you very much. And yeah, I think in terms of what I was able to cover in the book versus what I was not able to cover, some of the reviews of the book have acknowledged that I don't actually talk very much about the river. And part of that is because, as you said, that when you read something that someone else has written, that you're like, oh, well, they've already said it. So there's been so much published on the river that I find really like beautiful that I felt like, even though it's the most obvious one about cruising and saunas, I just like, it's already been written. It's already been beautifully discussed. So I just have a very, very long footnote that cites all of that work. And I mentioned it a couple times in this talk as well, because I think it is a theme that comes back because of the neck pain that Li Kangsheng still is dealing with, that he's also seeking both acupuncture and the massage in Days. And then when I was finishing up the book, Days had just come out. And so I had a footnote that is like, I'm now expanding into an entire book, basically, about this question of the relationship between sex work and care work and cosmopolitanism. I mean, I think all of Tsai's films are really concerned with cosmopolitanism, and often it's a cosmopolitanism from below, as in I Don't Want to Sleep Alone, I think is a really interesting statement about cosmopolitanism of migrant laborers. And that's also a film that's about care work, because the character, Norman Benaton's character, Rawang, nurses Li Kangsheng back to health after he's been beaten. And there's also a comatose man, also played by Li Kangsheng, who's being nursed by the landlady in that film. So I think I'm kind of picking up some of those themes from I Don't Want to Sleep Alone and from Days in this new project. There's a book by Christine Chin called Cosmopolitan Sex Workers that's about Kuala Lumpur that really inspired me for thinking about cosmopolitanism from below, and a lot of really excellent feminist anthropology on sex work. I think in general, this is true in queer theory and in sex work studies. The best work is done by anthropologists because they don't have a moral agenda. They're just trying to study it as a phenomenon. So Gail Rubin, who we've bonded over before, I just think that some of the best work on sexuality is from that kind of perspective of human variation, thinking about, what are the kind of internal rules of something like leather culture or of sex work that we don't try to kind of impose an external moral agenda on. So I'm particularly inspired by that kind of anthropological work, but now thinking about also the network films, because network films think a great deal about cosmopolitan forms of travel, migration, etc. It's also just a very strange time to be writing about migration at a time in which migration is being criminalized. And I'm, like I said, I went to grad school in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis is under assault right now. So I think it's both very urgent and very intense to be writing about migrants at this particular moment.
Yes.
I have a somewhat peculiar, perhaps idiosyncratic question, but I also just want to start by thanking you. That was really stimulating, and it's so stimulating that my thoughts are just jumping and skittering in
That's
intriguing ways. But let me try and chase just one down. Just to go back to when you began today, and you very just simply but eloquently kind of, situated your book for me in saying that so much work has been done on his films that's about temporality, and that you really thought that space was important, how to kind of integrate that into the conversation. Shortly after that moment, you shared with us that wonderful piece, 3-minute piece, Is it a dream?
Yeah.
Or It's a Dream. And perhaps because of the way in which you were framing your talk or your book in some ways in relation to space, in watching that piece, I was so struck by sound, and particularly the sound of the woman as she's
Eating durian,
pears,
or the pears,
that
yeah.
skewer, and the sound of the crunching, and it reminded me of moments. A lot of times when I think of his films or something like Goodbye Dragon Inn, I'm always kind of captivated by these sounds, and the way in which sound is used so that our sense of space, which sound so powerfully creates these spatial cues, that space, to play with the term that you use in your book, is disoriented.
Yeah.
And here's the peculiarity of my thinking, and this, I don't know if you're gonna be able to follow this, I'm not certain I can, but I began to think about sound as potentially one of the connective tissues between this kind of cinephilia and the pre-retirement films and the obsession with cinema as a space.
Yeah.
And so-called so-called expanded cinema, and the avoidance of so-called post-cinema, all of the online technologies and media, because both of those spaces, the movie theater or the museum space, are a space where people come together and you may be immersed in the kind of sensations of whatever images are projected, but you hear the people around you.
Yeah.
And so that sound, somehow I'm trying to make all these connections with
No, I see the connection. Yeah.
Operate, all these things. I just didn't know how much you had thought about sound, or if there were any just reflections to share.
So the funny thing is, I was when I was thinking about the volume of It's a Dream, not only is the kind of he's kind of whispering almost when he's talking about, when he's narrating, but also you do notice the sound of the pears and also just the way that the song at the end, you hear that it's being played in a hall. It's got that kind of echo effect, so it does make you hyperspatially aware. But when I was going to introduce it, I was going to say, oh, this is kind of like ASMR, which is a very post-cinema, like online phenomenon of people tuning into the sound of people eating. But it has been a thread in his work. In Goodbye Dragon Inn, there's the seeds that she's eating, and it's also thinking about the disciplinary space of museums. You expect that you are supposed to be a little bit quiet, right, in a movie theater and in a museum. So it's interesting that they're in Goodbye Dragon Inn, the character looks back at who's making too much noise with her food, and there's that sort of sense that this is a very disciplinary space where people are being too loud with their food, classrooms as well. But I think that it's also, I've heard some interviews with Tsai where he talks about why he doesn't muffle in the sound mix. He wants all the ambient noises, including sounds that are happening on the street, that usually you would, in mixing it later, you would get rid of all those sounds. And he says, no, I want them to be aware of, this is urban space. I want, if we can hear something that's going on, construction that's going on, that was not part of the shoot, I keep it in, because I want people to be thinking about what this space, this city space sounds like. He does a lot of that in I Don't Want to Sleep Alone, and in the Hong Kong film, The Night, that there's no dialogue. It's just the sounds of the walk signal and the cars, etc. So it really strongly establishes space, and I think it takes you to, I feel like I'm in Hong Kong when I hear that sound of the signal. So I think that there is a very, very strong connection between sound mixing and spatial attentiveness. Yeah. Thanks.
And music.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
We have about 5 minutes. Is there any question on the floor? Okay, let me abuse my my position again. So there are many graduate students here in CMS, in Cinema and Media Studies, or pursuing a certificate in Cinema and Media Studies. In my course, I half jokingly mentioned to my students that I may be the last one who was hired as a film historian.
A cinema historian, yeah.
Because nowadays a discipline is moving toward media studies, and many people are talking about the death of cinema and waning of cinema studies actually. But I see in Tsai's films there's a huge optimism about cinema. So cinema persists and cinema still lives, though it migrates or it moves to a different space.
Yeah.
So it cruises actually. So could you tell our students a little bit about I know it's very difficult, and it's difficult for students actually pursuing degrees in cinema studies, especially those who want to become a film historian. Could you?
I mean, for me, as people have been talking about the Netflix merger, it's like, I hope it lights a fire that the way that he just said, well, the people have spoken and they don't want to go to the cinema anymore. And sometimes it's even framed as like, well, no one can walk to the cinema, which is like, cineplexes have been in malls that people drove to for a long time. But yeah, I do think that the kind of Netflix and streaming phenomenon has resulted in maybe a somewhat less social experience of watching films together. That's why, at least in my classes, I'm still really insistent that we watch films together. And the post-screening discussion, I think, is such a crucial part that, yes, you can have that discussion online, but a lot of the discussion is people quickly going to read a review and decide whether they agree with the review or not, and then go to Letterboxd and and weigh in with their opinion. And I just think that is not what post-screening discussions are like in a cinema or a classroom setting, in which people are not jockeying for their opinions, but are really trying to make sense of what they've all just experienced together. So yeah, this is my pitch for still seeing films because of the post-film discussion. And that strange feeling that Roland Barthes describes of like feeling kind of sleepy and like you've just woken from a dream and that you are trying to process it, even if it's not spoken. I think there's a haunting quality to seeing a film in a theater that I don't feel as haunted by films when I watch them at home. And yeah, Roland Barthes, of course, was writing at a very particular moment in Paris, which is a very cinephile city, where he would go to the movies alone as part of this kind of cruisy experience. But he said, television doomed us to the family. I think it's just a wonderful quote. So I do think that that's also one of the things in terms of sociability and queerness, that there is something to be said for that awareness of being not in the domestic space watching a film.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thanks. Okay, so I think it's yeah. Thank you very much, and then
thank you so much for your thoughts.
And big applause.
Thank you.